In the blistering heat of the desert, Red Hollow stood stubbornly against the trying winds, a patchwork of weathered wood and hope. Dust devils danced through the empty streets, and the silence was broken only by the distant whistle of a train approaching, a glimpse of progress, or so they thought. That train carried the ambitious plans of Maxwell Crawford, a ruthless railroad tycoon whose greed knew no bounds. His men sauntered into town with dull signs in their eyes, waving promises of wealth while crushing the townsfolk's fears with threats and brass knuckles. Crawford's agent, a cool-eyed man named Harris, laid it out plainly, progressed on T wait for stragglers. You sell or you re-swept aside. Under the weight of their command, families were bought out and homes razed until a sense of solidarity began to stir. Among the townsfolk was Jack Mercer, a man carrying scars far more personal than bullet wounds, a former outlaw-turned-preacher haunted by a past that refused to stay buried. Mercer's eyes carried the weight of regret, but there was steel beneath the sorrow. He had once wielded his gun with deadly precision, a feared figure in the criminal underworld, but that life had burned him out, replaced by faith and a quiet vow to protect the innocent. When the railroad men pressed deeper into town, Mercer stood defiantly at the church's dusty doors, warning them to turn back. Progress built on blood ain't progress, he said, voice steady but edged with pain. The agent scoffed, and his patience, refusal nor role assistant jackass eyes flicked at the gathered townsfolk, their faces etched with fatigue and defiance. We ain't just fighting for land, he continued, voice rising above the wind. We're fighting for what is right, our homes, our children's futures, the spirit of Red Hollow itself. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, strengthened by the weight of recent losses. The agent's jaw tightened, but he pressed forward anyway. You're standing in the way of progress. That's a losing battle. His men advanced, weapons glinting in the sun, but Jack grazed a hand, halting them. Not today, Jack declared, as he reached into his coat and slowly drew his old gun belt from the church's chest. The leather was cracked, the metal tarnished, yet it carried echoes of a life long past perhaps, even the redemption he'd sought for so long. His fingers caressed the worn holster. This gun has been with me through hell and back, Jack admitted softly. But I laid it down for faith. Now it is time to pick up what is right again. He stepped forward, revolver in hand, eyes blazing with renewed purpose. The townsfolk rallied behind him, grabbing rifles and makeshift weapons they'd forged in desperation. Sand and dust billowed as they set up barricades along the unfinished track, stones, logs, and old wagons turned into shields. Every step they took was heavy with the memory of those lost and the hope of salvation. A distant whistle pierced the air, a haunting sound that foretold the approaching train. Steam H, the distant whistle pierced the air, a haunting echo that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken promises and ghosts long past. Steam hissed from the locomotive's massive boiler as it rolled like a beast through the desert, its iron belly creaking with each mile. The train's headlight cut a hungry swath through the dusty night, casting long shadows over the battered defences and the wary faces of the townsfolk. Jack watched from the church steps, his silhouette etched against the fiery dawn. His wounded side ached with every breath, but his eyes burned with quiet, unyielding resolve. The revolver, now resting on the worn altar, seemed like a relic of a man he'd thought he buried long ago, a symbol of a darker life he'd tried to forget. He took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the grit of the earth beneath his boots. The town was quiet, holding its breath, knowing that this moment could either mark their salvation or their doom. In his mind, memories flickered as silent echoes from a past filled with gunfire, recklessness, and regret. Yet here he stood, bloody but unbowed. Behind him, the townsfolk gathered in tense anticipation, clutching rifles and makeshift weapons, their eyes wary but determined. Each face bore the scars of the ordeal, the loss of loved ones, burned buildings, broken trust. But in the silence, Jack saw a flicker of hope, fragile yet unbroken. The train's whistle blared again, a desperate call into the vast emptiness. The steel beast roared to a halt just outside the town, a monument to greed and progress. Shadows spilled from the caboose as desert winds danced with the dust, swirling around the gathered fighters. With a slow nod, Jack turned to face the oncoming train. His hand brushed the gun belt at his waist, a silent prayer passing his lips. The gun he'd laid down so long ago was now a twin of his old, ruthless self, no longer a symbol of violence, but a promise to protect what remained of Red Hollow. The first wave of mercenaries disembarked, their faces hardened by violence, eyes hungry for blood. Jack's gaze fixed on their leader, a towering figure with an icy stare and a crooked scar across his cheek. This was the man he'd once called enemy, and perhaps the one he'd been chasing all these years. The townsfolk raised their rifles in unison, a silent act of defiance standing against the darkness. Jack stepped forward, voice steady but strong, echoing across the silent morning. You came with steel and fire, but you were about to find out this land has got more than just dirt beneath her feet. The rival gunslinger's grin was a cold smirk. Thought I'd find you here, Jack. Looks like even the devil has got a conscience. Hope it is enough to save you now. Jack's finger lingered on the trigger, his eyes looking with his old adversary. I am no devil anymore. Just a man fighting for what is right, whether that is redemption or damnation, I ain't certain. But I'll die standing on this ground. The duel ignited in a blaze of gunfire, echoes bouncing from canyon walls and empty streets. When the dust settled, Jack's hand was steady, his shot true, and his rival lay sprawled on the cracked earth. The gunfire ceased, leaving only the distant chug of the locomotive and the rising sun's golden glow. Slowly, the mercenaries retreated, their bravado shattered by the resolve of those fighting for their home. The trader's engine roared as it started to inch forward again, coming to a halt just outside the town's last barricades. Jack, wounded but unbowed, stepped back into the shadowed porch of the church, blood staining his sleeve, yet with a steadiness in his eyes. The townsfolk, battered but unbroken, gathered close, pressed shallow but their spirits stoked by his presence. He looked over the makeshift barricades at piles of scrap metal, concealed traps, fire pits were reminders of their fragile hope amidst chaos. As the train's whistle echoed faintly, signaling the end of one battle and the quiet start of another, Jack moved to the altar where he had laid down his gun all those years ago. With trembling fingers, he unfastened the battered leather holster that had once been his symbol of violence, now a relic of a darker past. Carefully placing his revolver on the altar, Jack whispered a prayer for forgiveness not just for himself, but for his town and the opportunities he never had to settle their differences peacefully. A gust of wind lifted dust and cinders into the dawn sky, blotting out the blood-red horizon. The townspeople looked on in silence, knowing that the fight had cost them dearly, but also recognizing that a new day might dawn over Red Hollow. Jack turned slowly, each step heavy with both pain and purpose, toward the ranch house where his old friend and confidant, Sarah, waited. Her face, streaked with soot and tears, softened as she saw him alive. She reached out and took his hand, silently promising to help him carry the burden of their shared scars. From the wreckage, children began to emerge, eyes wide with both fear and a flicker of hope. The other townsfolk started tending to the wounded, knowing that the battle for their land was over, but the war for dignity was only beginning. Jack, standing amidst the ruins and remnants of bitter conflict, stared toward the distant horizon where the train still hummed its arrival, a stark reminder of progress and promise, but also of greed and destruction. He knew that the railroad's true challenge was not just the physical barrier it represented, but the moral choice it forced upon them. Would they let bitterness harden their hearts and become like the men who tried to break their spirit? Or would they forge a new path, one paved with justice, mercy, and the enduring hope that even the deepest wounds could heal? As the first rays of sunlight cut through the dust-clouded air, Jack clenched his fist, holding onto the resolve that his faith and his second chance had given him. This was a story not just of destruction, but of redemption of men and women willing to stand tall against the weight of greed. He knew the road ahead, bleak as it was, would demand courage. But so long as the wind carried the stories of Red Hollow as defiance, the spirit of this small frontier town would endure not as a symbol of suffering, but of resilience. And as the train's engine finally started to move again, Jack turned back toward the church, where a single candle flickered atop the altar, a sign that even in darkness, hope could find a way to burn bright. The first rays of dawn spilled over the broken town, casting long shadows across the scud streets. Jack limped back into the church, clutching his side, each step a testament to the toll of battle-etched sweat and grit. The townsfolk gathered behind him, faces streaked with soot and tears, yet holding firm with rifles cradled like sacred relics. It was more than just a fight for land or progress. It was a stand for dignity, for the very soul of Red Hollow. In the soft glow of that solitary candle, Jack reached out and took the worn, leather-bound gun belt from beside the altar, an artifact of a past he tried to obey. That belt had seen blood, loss, and redemption. Now it symbolized both the darkness he escaped and the light he fought to preserve. This town, Jack's voice broke the silence, ain't just dirt and wood. It has promise. It has memory. And it has our chance to build something that can be torn down. Some looked at him uncertain, others with quiet resolve, knowing full well the price of victory might still be steep. Outside, the first train whistle echoed haunting, relentless, marking the start of a new chapter laced with danger and hope alike. The mercenaries, beaten back but not broken, retreated into the shadows of the desert night, their pride wounded but their greed still smoldering. For now, as the dust settled, the townspeople began to rebuild what was lost, every plank laid and every nail driven with the weight of collective sacrifice. Jack stayed in the church, eyes fixed on the flickering flame, remembering the promise made, the promise to remain vigilant to guard this fragile rebirth. His heart, once burdened by regret, now beat strong with purpose. Yet, in every quiet moment, he could feel the echoes of his past, a reminder that the line between salvation and damnation is thin. Somewhere in the far-off hills, perhaps even still lurking in the shadows, his old rivals and sins waited, silent but not defeated. But if Red Hollow's spirit was to endure, it would need guardians as willing to carry the torch forward, even when darkness threatened to swallow it whole. Standing at the edge of the town, Jack looked out toward the horizon where the vast, open sky met the endless desert. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The promise of progress would come, and with it, new conflicts. Yet now, with his revolver at his side and hope burning in his chest, he was ready to face whatever storms marched in. In his heart, he carried the memory of every soul who fought, who loved this land, and who believed in second chances. For them, for all of Red Hollow, he would stand firm. Because sometimes, even in the grimiest dawn, hope refused to fade, it merely whispered, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. And so, as the sun rose high, Jack Mercer took a deep breath, turned back toward the quiet sanctuary of his church, and prepared to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning light spilled across the desolate plains, casting long shadows over the battered town of Red Hollow. The scars of yesterday's battle lingered, smouldering fires smudged the horizon, and the uneasy silence was punctuated only by distant crows circling overhead. Jack Mercer, battered but unbowed, limped toward the church steps, each movement a reminder of the price paid for salvation and resistance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and old faith. He gently placed his revolver, still warm from the duel on the worn altar, as if anchoring his resolve once more. His hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from a renewed understanding. Sometimes the greatest strength lay in restraint, but there were moments when grip must override grace. Outside, townsfolk began emerging, women shielding their children, old men clutching rifles they've never fired in anger, young boys stealing cautious glances at the flattened horizon. Their eyes held a mixture of fear and newfound hope, knowing that the battle was just one chapter in a larger story of perseverance. Jack lifted his gaze, eyes filled with hard-won resolve. This town is not just a patch of land, he whispered aloud. It is a testament to what is right, what is just, what is worth fighting for. His voice carried across the quiet street, stirring a faint embers of unity in the weary assembly. As the sun climbed higher, it revealed the scars inflicted on Red Hollow, burned storefronts, broken fences, and memories etched into every cracked brick. Yet amidst the ruins, life persisted, flowers daring to bloom in the cracks, children playing beneath the watchful eyes of their mothers. The steam train, halted at the edge of town, seemed to serve as both a symbol of destruction and hope, a promise of progress, yet a reminder of the destruction ensued along the way. Jack stared at it for a long moment, knowing that the fight for justice wasn't over, it simply shifted form. In the days that followed, the townsfolk began rebuilding, not just structures, but their battered spirits. They forged alliances, shared stories of loss and hope, and vowed to protect their homes from future threats, be it from greed, violence, or the ghosts of their own pasts. Jack found himself praying more often, not out of obligation, but out of genuine supplication, asking for strength to forgive, courage to stand, and wisdom to guide them through the coming storms. His past, once a heavy chain, now served as a reminder that redemption was a journey, not a destination. Evening fell once more over Red Hollow, and as the stars twinkled into existence, Jack sat on the church porch, gaze fixed on the distant mountains. The wind whispered through the sparse trees, carrying tales of bravery and broken dreams alike. He knew that life in the frontier was a constant gamble, a dance on the edge of chaos and order. In those quiet moments, he reflected on the price of his salvation, how he'd been broken and remade, a man forged in fire and faith. He understood that true strength was rooted in their fragile balance, the ability to hold on to hope, even when the dark threatens to swallow everything whole. As dawn approached once more, Jack rose from his seat, steady and unshaken. He stepped back into the church, where relics of past sins and present victories intertwined. The town was scarred but standing, battered but resilient. And he, with his gun belt in hand and the memory of lost friends in his heart, prepared once again to face whatever the future would bring. Because sometimes, even in the grimiest dawn, hope refused to fade, it merely whispered, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. And so, as the sun rose high, Jack Mercer took a deep breath, turned back toward the quiet sanctuary of his church, and prepared to face whatever tomorrow might bring, and with it the promise of redemption yet to come. As Jack moved slowly across the battered streets, his shadow stretched long and somber, cast by the stubborn sun that refused to hide it behind the dusty clouds. The town, scarred yet somehow resilient, stood silent, a testament to the stubborn will of men and women who refused to be broken. Word of the firefight spread quickly, carried on the wind like a whisper of hope amid chaos. The townsfolk gathered again in the church, their faces etched with exhaustion but burning with renewed resolve. Some looked at Jack with gratitude, others with questions, all saw in him a survivor, not just of the gun smoke, but of a world that had tried to swallow their small town hall. After the battle, the wreckage was strewn across the streets, the burned-out wagons, shattered rail ties, and discarded shells, but what remained was their spirit. Jack's hand lingered on the wooden pew as he looked out over the gathered crowd, his voice gravelly yet steady. "We faced down evil today," he said. "But the real fight ain't over. The railroad has halted, true, but the greed behind it is still out there, lurking. We ain't just fighting for ourselves, we're fighting for everyone who comes after us, for the peace that comes from standing together. From the back of the church, a young girl stepped forward, clutching a battered door. Her trembling voice broke the silence. Will they come back, Mr. Mercer? Will they try again? Jack knelt and met her eyes. Maybe, he admitted quietly. But we'll all be ready. Because sometimes hope ain't a fancy word, it is a choice. And we've chosen to fight for ours, no matter how dark the night gets. Outside, the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, washing Red Hollow in a soft golden hue. The heavy machinery was abandoned for now, the threat temporarily diminished. Yet, the scars remained, as did the lessons of men like Jack Mercer, who'd seen beneath a veneer of greed and learned to forgive himself. He looked once more at the relic of his past, the gun barrel from his outlaw days, hanging loosely on the church wall, and flexed his fingers, remembering the weight of what he'd once carried. But today, that weight felt lighter because he carried something new, a cautious hope rooted in redemption. As the town began to stir, a few bold figures approached Jack, offering steady hands to rebuild what was lost. The towness blacksmith, a stoic woman who'd lost her son in the crossfire, nodded silently in agreement. A young boy, no older than 10, stood beside Jack, clutching a rusty old lantern symbolic of their collective resolve to illuminate the path ahead. In this fragile peace, Jack understood that true victory wasn't in guns or bloodshed, but in the courage to turn wounds into wisdom. Yet he also remembered that evil as shadow never fully disappeared, it merely retreating, waiting for complacency to return. He slowly crossed the churchyard, pausing before the makeshift grave of the child who'd been lost, a poignant reminder that innocence had been taken, yet kindness and bravery could still forge a new future. Jack's eyes lingered on the mound of earth, then turned back to the rising sun, casting a long, summer glow over the town once again. Somewhere in the distance, the mournful whistle of a distant train echoed, a reminder of Progress's relentless march, but now the people of Red Hollow faced that future united, stronger for their scars. Jack knew the fight for this all wasn't over, it was merely paused, waiting for the next dawn to reveal what they'd made of themselves. And as he stepped into the church once more, he did so with a quiet resolve, believing that even in the grindest dawn, hope refused to fade. It whispered, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. Faint glow of dawn seeped through the stained glass, casting fractured colours onto the warm wooden pews. Jack's breath was slow, shallow, each inhale a reminder of life's fragile thread. His hand trembled as he reached for the worn leather of his old gun belt, the weight of past deeds pressing down on him like the heavy air before a storm. The rebels and townsfolk were gathered outside, the silence thick with anticipation, hearts pounding beneath rough-spun shirts. Memories of burned homes and fallen children haunted him, yet within that ache, a flicker of undying faith burned brighter. The rusted iron of his past clanged loudly in his mind those days when gunfire was the language of survival, and now, he wondered, was redemption still within reach? He placed his revolver gently on the altar, pressing his palm against the cold metal, as if sealing a promise that he might someday find peace. Outside, the townsfolk hushed, feeling the quiet strength of his resolve. A battered woman clutched a child close, her eyes moist yet resolute. The blackened street remained stubbornly silent, save for the distant chugging of the halted train and the echo of footsteps, both friends and foes alike waiting for what was to come. Jack stepped back from the altar, his voice steady despite the wounds and doubts intertwined within him. Red Hollow ain't just dirt and dust. It's all, he declared, voice echoing softly but with unwavering conviction. It is the heart of folks who refuse to give up, who fight for what is right, even when the world says otherwise. He looked out over the gathering, eyes narrowing with purpose. Tonight we stand as one, no more running, no more hiding. We fight not with guns alone, but with the hope that refuses to die. The townsfolk nodded, their faces etched with grit, ready to defend the land they loved. Jack's gaze lingered on a young boy, the boy's eyes wide with awe and fear, a reflection of every dream and doubt in this battered town. As the first light of dawn shattered the horizon, Jack turned to the church door, drawing it open slow. The air was thick with the scent of pine and gunpowder, the promise of blood and redemption intertwined. The townspeople filed behind him, some clutching rifles, others clutching hope. The approaching sound of hooves and iron wheels signaled the enemy's relentless advance. Jack's heart pounded, but his grip on his faith steadied. He knew this was more than a fight over steel and land. It was a battle between tyranny and the indomitable spirit of a people willing to risk everything for their future. As dust kicked up around the advancing soldiers, Jack's voice cut through the chaos. Remember who we are. We ain't just fighting for ourselves, but for every dream that has ever been crushed under these wheels of greed. The first shots rang out, echoing across the empty streets, a symphony of courage and despair. The town's defenders fought with ferocity, each man and woman standing firm against shadowed mercenaries. Sparks flew from rifles, the clang of metal against metal ringing in the crisp morning air. On the scaffold of wreckage and hope, Jack faced his old rival, his former outlaw nemesis turned dual challenger, guns drawn, eyes locked. The moment stretched forever as the sun crested the horizon, casting a golden glow over the battlefields of ash and valor. "You read just a sinner with a badge," Jack said softly, finger tightening on the trigger. "But I reckon even sinners can find redemption if they were willing to face the truth." His shot cried like thunder, a final act of defiance and reconciliation. When the dust settled, Jack stood victorious but wounded, breathing hard beneath the weight of his choices. The enemy's camp was in disarray, retreating back into the shadows from which they came, defeated but not broken. In the aftermath, silence fell once more, save for the whisper of wind through battered timbers and the distant rumble of the train that now sat halted, a monument to both greed and hope. Jack's battered figure moved slowly toward the church, each step a quiet declaration of resilience. He picked up his revolver, placing it carefully on the altar. Another chapter closed, another trial ended. The townsfolk approached, faced the street with dirt and tears, yet eyes filled with renewed faith in their future. That night, under a sky splattered with stars, Red Hollow was scarred but standing. Jack, resting one arm on his knee, looked out over the town, a flicker of a knowing smile touching his rugged face. In the shadows of his soul, he understood hope isn't an end, but a constant battle. Like the steam train's whistle in the distance, signals that even in the bleakest dawn, there's always a chance for Dawn's return. And as he stared into the darkened sky, he quietly believed that maybe, just maybe, the night had finally given way to something bitter. The first light crept over the jagged mesas, casting a pale glow that bled into the dust-choked streets of Red Hollow. Jack Mercer, battered but unbowed, limped to the church doors, each step heavy with both the weight of his wounds and the burden of hope. His hands trembled as he reached for his gun belt, the leather-worn but resilient an artifact of a life he'd sworn away, now rediscovered in this fragile moment. He unwrapped a battered cloth, revealing the brown leather, the silver conchos catching the meager sunlight. It was a relic, a symbol of battles fought and victories hard won not just against enemies, but against himself. With deliberate care, he strapped it around his waist, feeling the familiar weight settle into his form. His reflection in a cracked mirror inside the church was toothless, blind, but fired with a renewed fire, not the fire of gunpowder, but of redemption. The townsfolk gathered at the church steps, their faces a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and cautious hope. Among them, old Martha, who'd lost her daughter in the fire, looked at Jack with eyes full of both gratitude and sorrow. "You've done enough, preacher. You need to rest now," she whispered softly. Jack shook his head, voice raspy but steady. "Not yet. There is still work to do." His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the faint silhouette of the steam train churned up dust and anticipation. The sound of the whistle rising equal parts warning and promise carried on the wind. He remembered the weight of his past, the Gunslinger-esque grin, the reckless nights on outlaw trails, friends lost to the violence. But he knew the road to redemption was paved with sacrifices, not just prayers. Each step forward was a prayer in itself. As the first rays of dawn split the sky, Jack mounted a rugged horse, its black coat gleaming in the morning light. The townspeople watched silently, knowing this point was also beginning. The battle for Red Hollow won, for now had tested everyone else's limits. But perhaps the worst was behind them, and a new chapter was waiting. The steam train roared into town, clouds of smoke billowing like a waking beast. Jack approached the engine, its iron humming with power. The engineer, a young man with wide eyes, nodded in acknowledgement. "We re-headed east," he said simply, glancing at Jack. "Hope there's room for redemption on this line." Jack stepped onto the train's platform, then paused, turning to face the town one last time. "This town has got a spirit," he declared. "It ain't just these buildings or dirt. It is the people who stand up, even when everything is lost. And no matter how dark the night, the dawn is always waiting." He reached into his coat, pulling out the old gun belt, the one he'd carried through countless lifetimes. Gently, he laid it on the altar inside the church, a silent offering of penance and hope. His eyes lingered on it, then turned toward the horizon, where the train's wheels climbed rhythmically, a pulse of progress and change. The townsfolk watched as Jack, former outlaw, present savior, disappeared into the train's interior. His figure was small against the vast arid landscape, yet somehow larger than life. Behind him, Red Hollow breathed a collective sigh, its scars still visible but its heart beating strong. Like the steam train's whistle in the distance, it signaled that even in the bleakest dawn, there is always a chance for Dawn's return. And as he stared into the darkened sky, he quietly believed that maybe, just maybe, the night had finally given way to something better. A future rooted in the resilience of humble souls, where redemption isn't just a story, it's a journey they all walk together. And perhaps, in some quiet corner of the universe, Jack Mercer smiled just a little, knowing that the road ahead, though fraught with peril and maybe more darkness, would always be lit by the hope that flickers in every new sunrise.